Vault 111. This is where most modern fans first discovered that Vault-Tec was lying to everyone, and it's the perfect introduction to just how deep this conspiracy goes. You play as the sole survivor who enters what you think is a temporary decontamination shelter, only to be frozen in cryogenic pods for 200 years while watching your spouse get murdered and your son kidnapped. The Vault was advertised as a short-term safety measure, but was actually a long-term experiment in cryogenic preservation using unwitting test subjects. Vault 111 serves as most players' first real understanding that every vault door hides a different horror, and the people promising to save you are often the ones planning to experiment on you. But this cryogenic betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg compared to the systematic psychological torture happening elsewhere. Vault 101. This vault established the no one enters, no one leaves rule under complete dictatorial overseer control, creating a permanent prison disguised as a safety shelter. The vault number itself references George Orwell's 1984, Room 101, where people are sent for re-education, showing that Vault-Tec's designers were well aware they were creating totalitarian nightmares. Residents lived under absolute authoritarian control for generations, with the overseer maintaining power through isolation and information control. The Vault demonstrates how easily protection can become imprisonment when those in charge have unlimited authority and no oversight. If you thought permanent dictatorship was bad, the next revelation shows the true scope of Vault-Tec's deception. Vault-Tec Corporation. The Fallout TV show finally confirmed what fans suspected for decades. Vault-Tec didn't just profit from nuclear war, they actively orchestrated it. Corporate executives are shown plotting to drop the first nuclear bombs themselves to ensure their Vault experiments could proceed and guarantee their post-war dominance. This transforms every single Vault experiment, from cruel science into part of a master plan for corporate control of post-apocalyptic America. Vault-Tec had billions invested in underground facilities and human experimentation that could only be justified if civilization actually collapsed, making nuclear holocaust a business necessity. But even knowing Vault-Tec started the war, the real horror is how few people they actually intended to save. Control vaults. Out of 122 vaults constructed across America, only 17 were legitimate shelters designed to function as advertised, meaning 88% of Vault-Tec's safety shelters were actually torture chambers. This reveals the staggering scope of deception where nearly every family that thought they were being saved was actually being fed to human experimentation programs. The control vaults served as baseline data for comparison against the experimental horrors, but they also provided Vault-Tec with a small population of normal humans for whatever post-war plans they had in mind. The numbers prove that Vault-Tec viewed the American population as expendable test subjects, rather than people worthy of rescue. While these surface revelations are disturbing, they're nothing compared to the specific horrors conducted in individual vaults. Vault 87. This vault conducted systematic FEV testing by locking residents in chambers and exposing them to forced evolutionary virus, while scientists observed their mutations from behind safety glass. Within 2 weeks, most subjects died in agony from the transformation process, while survivors became the super mutants that would terrorize the capital wasteland for centuries. The experiment continued for years, with scientists documenting every stage of human transformation into hulking, often mentally impaired creatures. Vault 87 represents the ultimate violation of medical ethics, turning an entire community into unwilling test subjects for biological weapons research. But if you thought biological experimentation was the worst thing humans could do to each other, the next vault weaponized democracy itself. Vault 11. This experiment represents perhaps the most psychologically devastating manipulation in the entire Vault network. Residents were told they must democratically vote to sacrifice one person annually, or everyone in the Vault would be killed by the computer systems. For years, they held elections that were essentially murder campaigns, where people tried to nominate their enemies for death while the community tore itself apart through betrayal and political manipulation. The ultimate horror came when the final 5 survivors refused to continue the sacrifices, only to learn the computer was lying and actually congratulated them for making the right choice by not killing anybody. The Vault proved that even democracy can be perverted into a tool for systematic murder when authority figures control the information. While democratic murder was psychologically devastating, the next Vault trapped people in an even more personal hell. Vault 112. Dr. Stanislaus Braun trapped 85 residents in virtual reality pods for over 200 years, forcing them to endure psychological torture in his Tranquility Lane simulation for his personal amusement. The residents experienced repeated death and trauma within the simulation while being unable to truly die, creating perfect conditions for infinite psychological torture. Braun treated human consciousness like his personal video game, resetting scenarios whenever he got bored and subjecting people to whatever sadistic fantasies he could imagine. The Vault represents the ultimate fusion of technology and cruelty, where a single sociopathic scientist could torment dozens of people for centuries without consequence. If you thought virtual reality torture was sophisticated evil, the next Vault took a more direct biological approach. Vault 22. The agricultural experiment with plant spores went horrifically wrong when the enhanced vegetation turned residents into undead plant-human hybrid creatures called spore crawlers. The Vault's research into hardy, radiation-resistant crops created something far more sinister when the plants began using human hosts for reproduction and survival. Survivors became shambling horrors that were part human, part plant, and completely hostile to any remaining uninfected humans. The Vault shows how even beneficial research, like improving food production, can become a biological nightmare when conducted without proper safety protocols. But these well-documented horrors are just the surface level of what Vault-Tec was willing to do to people. Vault 27. This overcrowding experiment deliberately housed 2 people in space designed for 1 studying the psychological and social effects of extreme overcrowding in a sealed environment. The Vault was designed to create constant resource shortages, interpersonal conflicts, and claustrophobic conditions that would drive residents to violence and desperation. The experiment exists primarily in reference materials, but it represents one of Vault-Tec's most straightforward approaches to human suffering through simple mathematical cruelty. By doubling the population and keeping resources constant, they guaranteed that every day would be a struggle for survival even without external threats. While overcrowding was simple, mathematical cruelty, the next experiments used gender as a weapon. Vault 68 and Vault 69. These twin experiments in sexual dynamics placed 999 men with 1 woman in Vault 68 and 999 women with 1 man in Vault 69. The vaults were designed to study how extreme gender imbalances would create social chaos, sexual competition, and psychological trauma for everyone involved. The lone individual of each gender faced impossible pressure and exploitation, while the majority competed desperately for attention, resources, and reproductive rights. These experiments show how Vault-Tec was willing to use basic human biology and social dynamics as tools for systematic psychological torture. But if you thought gender manipulation was disturbing, the next Vault created an army of mentally damaged clones. Vault 108. The cloning experiment created 54 copies of original resident Gary, while deliberately designing leadership conflicts through terminal cancer for the overseer and failing power systems. The Gary clones were mentally stunted and programmed with limited vocabulary, eventually going insane and escaping their chambers to cannibalize the entire Vault staff. The Vault became filled with dozens of deranged clones wandering the halls, endlessly repeating Gary, while surrounded by the bones of the scientists who created them. The experiment represents Vault-Tec's willingness to play God with human reproduction, while demonstrating complete disregard for the psychological welfare of their artificial humans. While cloning created physical horror, the next Vault weaponized art itself. Vault 92. This experiment housed musicians who were exposed to white noise and hypnotic frequencies designed to make them violent through subliminal psychological manipulation. The Vault tested whether creativity and artistic expression could be controlled and weaponized through sound-based brainwashing techniques. The audio manipulation eventually drove residents to madness and violence, turning artists into killers while proving that even humanity's most beautiful expressions could be perverted into tools of control. The experiment shows how Vault-Tec viewed every aspect of human culture as potential ammunition for their psychological warfare research. But if you thought weaponizing music was twisted, the next Vault used paranoia as a surgical instrument. Vault 19. This paranoia induction experiment divided residents into red and blue sectors with separate overseers, using subliminal messaging, flickering lights, strange drafts, falsified medical records, and limited water supplies to create artificial distrust. Red residents believed blues were poisoning them, while blues thought reds were sabotaging resources, creating escalating conflicts that tore the community apart. The experiment was technically a failure because the Vault's location above sulfur deposits created real paranoia symptoms like headaches and nausea, making it a chemical rather than non-chemical means of inducing paranoia. The Vault demonstrates how easily people can be manipulated into hating each other over completely fabricated differences when authority figures control the information flow. These documented experiments represent just the Vaults that made it into the final games, but the cut content reveals even darker possibilities. Vault 120. Todd Howard confirmed this cut Fallout 4 content would have featured a BioShock-style underwater vault with a massive, sentient octopus living outside the facility. The underwater vault would have combined claustrophobia, isolation, and the constant threat of a giant intelligent predator that could potentially breach the facility at any time. This cut content shows how much darker and more ambitious Fallout 4's vault experiments originally were before being scaled back for the final release. The concept demonstrates that Vault Tech's imagination for human suffering extended even to the ocean floor. While underwater horror was cut from the final game, other cancelled vaults explored different forms of family destruction. Vault 29. From the cancelled Van Buren Fallout 3, this vault only admitted children under 15 years old, permanently separating them from their parents, who were sent to different facilities. The experiment was designed to study child development without adult guidance, while using the trauma of family separation as a psychological variable. Children would have been raised by AI systems while never knowing what happened to their parents or siblings, creating a generation of psychologically damaged individuals. This family separation experiment represents pure cruelty, disguised as developmental psychology research. If you thought separating families was evil, the next vault added wild animals to make survival even more impossible. Vault 43. This survival horror scenario locked 20 men, 10 women, and 1 panther together to study how desperate humans would react to a deadly predator in their living space. The experiment exists only in reference materials, but represents Vault Tech's willingness to use apex predators as experimental variables in human behavior studies. Residents would have faced the constant threat of being killed and eaten while trying to maintain some form of civilization in an impossibly dangerous environment. The Vault shows how Vault Tech viewed both humans and animals as disposable components in their twisted scientific experiments. But the released games contained even more sophisticated forms of psychological manipulation. Vault 75. Hidden beneath Malden Middle School, this eugenics experiment only admitted children under 15 while immediately executing all adults upon entry. Children underwent rigorous physical training and combat drills while being told they were preparing for up to planned, but at age 18 they were sorted into 3 categories. Genetically superior children had their genetic material harvested, then were killed. Intellectually superior but physically weak children were recruited as scientists, and inferior children were executed immediately. A child named Rohit discovered classified papers and organized a successful uprising with James and Alma, aided by Washington, a former resident turned scientist who had grown attached to the younger children. When players arrive, only gunner mercenaries and skeletons in Vault Tech uniforms remain as evidence of this systematic child harvesting operation. While child harvesting was openly murderous, the next vault used false hope as a weapon. Vault 81. This vault was designed to test experimental pathogens on residents using mole rats as carriers, but Overseer Olivet discovered the secret lab and locked the scientists inside, allowing residents to live normally for over 200 years. When the sole survivor arrives, a child named Austin accidentally enters the hidden lab and contracts mole rat disease, which causes permanent health damage and can only be cured with a single Vault 81 cure found in the lab. This creates one of Fallout 4's most difficult moral choices, where players must decide whether to save themselves or save the child, showing how even subverted vault experiments continue to create ethical dilemmas centuries later. If you thought moral dilemmas were cruel, the next vault deliberately destroyed people who had overcome their worst problems. Vault 95. Located in the glowing sea, this vault housed 72 former chem addicts who were successfully rehabilitated over 5 years with no access to drugs. After 5 years of sobriety and recovery, a hidden stash of psycho and other chems was automatically unlocked, and the vault descended into chaos as residents murdered each other for drugs. The experiment proved that psychological addiction persists even after physical recovery, making recovery meaningless when temptation returns. By 2287, the vault is overrun by gunners, and Kate's companion quest involves using the vault's clean room technology to cure her addiction, though this only addresses physical dependence. But Vault Tech's cruelty extended beyond just psychological manipulation to deliberate radiation exposure. Vault 12. Built beneath Bakersfield with a vault door designed not to close properly, this experiment deliberately exposed residents to radiation to study long-term effects on human physiology. Most residents became ghouls and eventually founded Necropolis under the leadership of Set, who drove out the original human overseer. In Fallout 1, players must retrieve the water chip from this vault, but doing so cuts off Necropolis's water supply, forcing players to choose between saving their own vault or helping the ghoul community survive. The vault represents one of Vault Tech's most straightforward biological biological experiments, with lasting consequences for the entire wasteland. While radiation exposure was scientifically brutal, the next vault used social class as a torture device. Vault 114, advertised as luxury accommodations for Boston's upper class, this vault was actually built with shared dormitory-style rooms, communal bathrooms, no luxury amenities, and Soup Canhary, a paranoid homeless man, as the designated overseer. The experiment was designed to study how wealthy elites would cope with sudden loss of privilege and authority, forcing them to live in conditions worse than most lower-class housing. The vault was never completed due to the bombs falling early, ironically saving the wealthy residents from Vault-Tech's class warfare experiment. When players arrive, it's overrun by triggermen holding Nick Valentine captive. If you thought class warfare experiments were sophisticated, the next vault let artificial intelligence conduct its own sadistic research. Vault 51. This Appalachian vault was overseen by a ZAX supercomputer tasked with selecting the perfect overseer through competitive elimination, forcing residents into increasingly violent challenges while the AI observed and manipulated them. The computer would pit residents against each other until only one remained, treating human life as variables in its twisted selection algorithm. Evidence suggests residents eventually discovered Zax's manipulation and rebelled, with bodies found throughout the vault showing various causes of death as some fought while others committed suicide rather than participate. 2 vault dwellers rigged the door mechanism to permanently seal the vault from outside, trapping the murderous AI inside with the consequences of its experiment. But Vault-Tech also conducted experiments with legitimate purposes that still went horribly wrong. Vault 79. This vault stored the entire U.S. gold reserve under Secret Service protection, with the vault number 79 corresponding to gold's atomic number on the periodic table. While this represented one of the few vaults with a legitimate protective purpose rather than an experiment, reactor failure turned half the Secret Service into feral ghouls, trapping the survivors for months without supplies. The vault shows how even Vault-Tech's non-experimental facilities became death traps through poor maintenance and design flaws, proving that the company's incompetence was as dangerous as their deliberate cruelty. While most vaults are well documented, some exist only as mysterious references in terminal entries. Burkittsville Vault. This Maryland vault appears only in a Fallout 3 terminal entry stating that it wouldn't open its doors and became surrounded by cannibals who killed anyone trying to reach it. The vault represents one of the series' unsolved mysteries, where we know something horrible happened, but the specific details remain hidden. The terminal entry suggests the vault may have been conducting experiments so disturbing that the residents chose to remain sealed inside rather than face the outside world. Whether the cannibals were failed vault dwellers, outside raiders, or something worse remains a terrifying unknown. But the deepest level of Vault lore goes beyond individual experiments to reveal the conspiracy behind everything. Vault-Tech started the war. This fan theory existed for decades based on Vault-Tech logos found on unexploded bombs in game files, but the Fallout TV show finally confirmed it in 2024. The series showed Vault-Tech executives actively plotting to drop nuclear weapons themselves, because they had billions invested in vault construction and human experimentation that could only be justified by actual nuclear apocalypse. The revelation recontextualizes the entire Fallout universe, transforming the Great War from a tragic accident into a deliberate corporate decision to murder hundreds of millions of people for profit. Vault-Tech didn't just prepare for nuclear war, they caused it to protect their investment and ensure their post-war dominance. While the corporate conspiracy was hidden for decades, some Easter eggs were hiding in plain sight. The real Vault-Tech phone number. During Fallout 4's release, 1-888 Vault-Tech was actually callable and played a recorded message saying, "Due to unexpectedly high call volume, all representatives are busy. There are 101 million callers ahead of you," directly referencing Vault 101. The phone number was a real marketing stunt that let players interact with Vault-Tech as if it were a real company, complete with the kind of customer service runaround that makes you want to hang up immediately. The message's reference to 101 million callers was both a joke about customer service hell and a hint that Vault-Tech viewed the entire American population as potential customers for their death traps. But the phone number was just one of many hidden meanings embedded throughout the series. Hidden Vault number meanings. The Vault numbering system reveals multiple layers of organizational psychology that reward deep analysis. Vault 13 uses an unlucky number and suffers the water chip failure that drives the original game's plot, while Vault 21 references blackjack and is located on the Strip in New Vegas. Vault 69 contains an obvious sexual reference that matches its gender experiment, while Vault 76 references 1776 and serves as America's tricentennial vault. Vault 79 uses gold's atomic number and stores the U.S. gold reserves, while Vault 101 represents binary for 5, making it the vault for the 5th Fallout game. The numbering pattern reveals that single digits were control vaults and basic experiments, teens focused on social manipulation, 20s, 30s conducted biological experiments, 70s, 90s handled resource management, and 100s plus represented advanced psychological and technological experiments. These numerical patterns connect to something even deeper about the Vault system's true purpose. The TV show Vault Trinity. The Fallout series revealed Vaults 31, 32, and 33 as part of Buds, a breeding program to create the ideal Vault Tech management class for post-war corporate control. Vault 31 housed cryogenically frozen Vault Tech executives and managers, while Vaults 32 and 33 contained agricultural communities that would intermarry to maintain genetic diversity. The twist was that all overseers came from Vault 31, with frozen corporate executives being thawed out to assume leadership positions and breed with the agricultural population. Vault 32 discovered the truth about the breeding program approximately 2 years before the show's events, leading to messages like, "We know the truth" and "Death to management" written on walls before the population turned on each other through murder, suicide, and cannibalism. Betty, a Vault 31 executive, covered up the truth by claiming raiders killed everyone, while Vault 33 remained unaware of their role as breeding stock for corporate overlords. But the Vault concept itself was inspired by real-world Cold War paranoia. Real-world inspirations. Fallout's vaults were directly inspired by real Cold War bunkers like Cheyenne Mountain and Raven Rock, massive underground facilities designed to protect government officials and military leaders during nuclear war. However, as historians have noted, nothing like a true Fallout vault, not a multi-generational, self-sufficient underground community designed to house civilian populations for decades, was ever built or seriously contemplated in reality. The vault concept takes real Cold War bunker technology and pushes it to science fiction extremes, creating underground cities that could theoretically function independently for centuries. This shows how Fallout uses recognizable technology as a foundation for exploring much more extreme scenarios about human survival and corporate control. The Enclave connection reveals the ultimate purpose behind all this suffering. The Enclave connection. Van Buren concept material suggested vaults were designed as test chambers for eventual space colonization by the Enclave, though this was never fully canonized in the final games. This would explain the seemingly pointless cruelty of many experiments. Every vault was testing human limits and social dynamics for future off-world colonies, where people would be trapped in small spaces for generations. The space colonization angle transforms the vault experiments from random sadism into systematic research for humanity's expansion beyond Earth. Whether this was Vault-Tech's actual plan or just one of many post-war contingencies, it shows how the company viewed Earth's population as expendable test subjects for grander ambitions that would only benefit the corporate and political elite. The development history reveals something fundamental about how the Vault system evolved. Development meta lore. The Vault experiments weren't part of the original 1997 Fallout and were added by Tim Kaine after Fallout 1's release, when he realized the Vault concept needed more depth and complexity. The original game was designed to use the GURPS system until Steve Jackson Games objected to the violence, forcing creation of the Special system in just 1 week under intense development pressure. This development history shows how the Vault experiments evolved from simple bomb shelters into the elaborate torture chambers that define the series today. The fact that the most iconic element of Fallout lore was essentially an afterthought proves that sometimes the best ideas come from expanding and improving on simple concepts rather than having everything planned from the beginning. From simple shelters to corporate conspiracy to breeding programs for management classes, the Fallout Vault Iceberg reveals how a seemingly straightforward post-apocalyptic premise conceals layer after layer of systematic horror. Each level down exposes more of Vault-Tech's willingness to treat human beings as expendable test subjects in pursuit of scientific knowledge, corporate power, and post-war dominance. The Iceberg format shows how Fallout rewards deep engagement, with casual players seeing adventure and exploration while dedicated fans discover a comprehensive critique of corporate capitalism, government complicity, and the willingness of authority figures to sacrifice entire populations for their own benefit. The Vaults prove that in the Fallout universe, the greatest enemy of humanity was never nuclear war or radiation, but the human capacity for treating other humans as disposable resources in service of abstract goals, whether those goals were scientific advancement, space colonization, corporate profit, or the creation of a compliant management class to rule over the ashes of the old world. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Fallout Vault Iceberg and want to see every Fallout state explained, click the video on the screen.